All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, from whatever part of the world or part of the globe you're joining from. Thank you so much, very distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Today we are looking at the Alumni Thought Leadership webinar, a collaboration with the SEB LU and Stellenbosch Business School Alumni Association. And it's good to have every one of you join us from every part of the world. Please stay connected, grab a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, and we're ready to proceed. So it's good to have you, and I have very wonderful, great panelists who will be working with us very closely this morning or this afternoon, this evening, from wherever part of the world you are. And I want you to please stay tuned and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you so much for being part of this very wonderful program, and I look forward to a very robust conversation with my panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, let me quickly give a brief introduction regarding the topic of the day, because we're looking at posterior leadership, a future perspective. And it's important that we have a background of what we're talking about before I begin to invite my panelists one after the other. Ladies and gentlemen, and their colleagues, as we navigate the complex challenges of the 21st century, it is imperative that we embrace the concept of posterior leadership. In a world that is increasingly interconnected and interdependent, the traditional model of one of the individuals swooping in to save the day is no longer sufficient. We must instead cultivate leaders who prioritize collaboration, empathy, and collective action. And as we proceed, please again, let us begin to look at all of the links. If you are not able to join us from YouTube, you should be able to connect from all of the social media handle that has been provided for you to be able to connect. And please stay tuned. And to proceed, we have to provide some context. Let us also reflect on the state of our global society today. We have made remarkable progress in areas such as technology, medicine, and human rights. However, we also face existential threats such as climate change, income inequality, and political polarization. These issues require a new type of leadership, one that empowers communities, fosters inclusivity, and seeks long-term sustainable solutions. For example, in the global south, we often see communities that are disproportionately affected by poverty, conflict, and environmental degradation. Post-Iraq leadership in these regions means amplifying the voices of the marginalized, investing in grassroots initiatives, and working towards systemic change that addresses the root causes of inequality. Very distinguished ladies and gentlemen, conversely, in the global north, where resources and power are more concentrated, post-Iraq leadership entails humility, accountability, and a commitment to dismantling structures of privilege. It means recognizing that no one person or nation has all the answers, and that true progress comes from partnerships built on mutual respect and understanding. Again, let me pause a bit while we begin to look at all of those social media handles where we can join this program from. We have the Twitter, we have the Instagram, the Facebook, we have the LinkedIn Live, and then we can do hashtag responsible leadership for us to be able to participate in this program. So I will enjoy all of the listeners from all over the world to please connect from either Twitter at SUBUS School Alum. That is, I take it again, at SUBUSSCHOOLALUM. That is the Twitter handle of this program. And also on Instagram, we have the SUBUSSCHOOLALUMNI. That is the Instagram where we can also connect from. And also Facebook, we have USB Alumni ASOC, that's the Alumni Association. LinkedIn Live is also available at Stellenbosch Business School Alumni association. And like I mentioned earlier, we can have hashtag responsible leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, let us ensure that we do that. And as well as the School of Economics and Business, for the Health Ljubljana, we can also use their Instagram at Alumni EF. At Facebook, there's also Alumni EKONOMSKE FKULTETE. And then the LinkedIn also is available at Alumni EKONOMSKE FAKULTETE. And then the podcast is Alumni Connect Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, let us ensure that we join via all of this live stream and be part of this robust discussion that's taking place at the moment. As I proceed, or before I conclude my brief introduction, I'm yours sincerely, Olushiji Aino. I am the chairperson of West African Alumni Chapter of the University of Stellenbosch Business School Alumni, and also have a PhD in Development Economics. Please follow me. My profile is also there for you to go through. As I conclude on the introduction, ladies and gentlemen, conversely, I mentioned that in the global north, where resources and power are more concentrated, post-heroic leadership entails humility, accountability, and a commitment to dismantling structures of privilege. It means recognizing that no one person or nation has all the answers, and the true progress comes from partnership, built on mutual respect and understanding. And if we bring in the African context in this situation, especially looking at all of the issues and all of the problems that African countries have gone through post-independence across different nations, then within the African context, we find a rich tapestry of cultures, traditions, and histories that offer valuable lessons in post-heroic leadership. African leaders have long understood the importance of community cooperation and Ubuntu, the belief in a universal bond that connects all humanity. By drawing on these values, African leadership can guide the continent towards a future that is equitable, peaceful, and prosperous for all. We all know that across several regions, from ECOWAS to SADC, even to the north part of the continent, we've been seeing different levels of war-ranging, climate-related issues, and insecurity that has, in a way, delved into the peaceful coexistence of African nations. As I conclude, the role of African leadership in post-heroic leadership cannot be overstated. As we move forward in this rapidly changing world, African nations have a unique opportunity to lead by example, to show the rest of the world what true partnership and solidarity look like. By embracing the model of leadership that is collaborative, compassionate, and forward-thinking, we can create a future that is brighter and more just for all. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That is just a brief introduction of what we're about to do at this hour. And without wasting time, I want to bring in the first speaker who will be speaking to us and looking at the global context of this very important topic that we are discussing today. Again, I have two very renowned and very respected professors who will be joining me from different regions. One of them will be joining me from the very far side of Europe, and the other professor will be joining me from Africa. So stay tuned and listen as we navigate through this program this afternoon. And I can assure you that it's going to be one of the most interesting programs you have ever attended. In fact, maybe in the last 1 year. So again, thank you very much as I bring my first panelist to the stage to delve into this issue and this all-important topic that we have today. And that's the post-heroic leadership, a future perspective. I'll be bringing in our first speaker into the room just a moment, and I will read his profile very shortly. I'll be bringing in Professor Roux, and I want to please quickly go through his profile. Professor Roux is the head teaching and learning future studies programs at the Stellenbosch Business School. Andrew was the director of the Institute for Future Research, IFR, at the University of Stellenbosch from 1996 to August 2015. Andrew now lectures on economics at the Stellenbosch Business School and teaches on various executive education programs in South Africa, and from time to time in Australia, Mauritius, Namibia, Switzerland, Tanzania, Ghana, and of course, I wouldn't have expected him not to have been to Nigeria to have taught economics. Ladies and gentlemen, Andre is a visiting professor at the Very Business School in Belgium and at the Beijing Business School in China. He is also a guest lecturer on postgraduate programs at the School of Public Management, STEL, and the postgraduate diploma in managing HIV and AIDS in the workplace. Andre holds a PhD in economics and is responsible for more than 150 popular publications, one book, 13th edition, 6 chapters in scientific books, 10 publications in scientific journals, 25 papers presented at the domestic and international conference. He is a regular guest on radio and television programs. He has supervised 6 PhD theses and more than 150 postgraduate students. He was awarded a prize for Best Lecturer at the Business School between 2016 and 2018. Ladies and gentlemen, a very renowned professor of economics. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome with me to the stage, Professor Andre Roux. Prof, it's good to have you today, and we look forward to learning from your very deep prowess in this topic, on this subject of discourse today, and also to be able to help my audience to understand some of the issues around post-era leadership. Thank you so much for being here today, and it's good to have you. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that very gracious introduction. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night to all our, let's say, listeners and viewers. According to our records, we have people from as far afield as Botswana, Burundi, Canada, Croatia, Germany, Ghana, Ireland, Namibia, Nigeria, Norway, Serbia, Slovenia, South Africa, UK, and Zimbabwe. And may I just then start off on behalf of the business school and even the university, welcome you all, and also welcome our collaboration with our colleagues from, including not least of which, of course, Miha from Slovenia. I think this is an exciting initiative where we are joining forces from totally different parts of the world on an issue which I would like to think is relevant in any part of planet Earth. I would also like to ask perhaps if I can have my slideshow put up. There we are. I trust you can all see that. So let me get going straight away by starting off with the following almost confession, and that is I am not an expert in leadership. I'm an economist. I like to think, a futurist. And I am also, and things aren't working so well as I hoped here, I'm an economist, I'm a futurist, and I'm a possibilist. These words should be appearing, but there might be a slight technical problem. Economist, futurist, and possibilist. And I want to emphasize this last point of being a possibilist. And I'm taking the cue here from, amongst others, Hans Rosling, who reminds us that a possibilist neither hopes without reason nor fears without reason. A possibilist constantly resists the overdramatic worldview. A possibilist has a look at historical progress and is therefore convinced that further progress is possible. It's about having a worldview that is constructive and useful, and not just destructive and trying to break things down. Put differently, as a futurist and a possibilist, we like to think that you should never say never. Expect the unexpected, but don't be surprised if the unexpected happens. So there is where I'm coming from. So I want to give you a view, the way I see it, of the topic, the point of view of partly an economist, partly a futurist, and underlying all of that, a possibilist. And in the world of futurist thinking, a very important concept is that of foresight. Knowledge or sound judgment into a future event occur. Perhaps more importantly, the ability, by exploring trends, to judge correctly what is going to happen in the future and planning your actions based on this. Now, I'm not saying here at all that we could predict the future with total accuracy, not at all. But based on our best understanding of trends, we can try to get a more informed picture of how futures may unfold. So given that, I want to share with you just a few global trends. In the spirit of this word foresight, trying to understand trends, I've put together, I've been using this for a couple of years, perhaps a bit of a gimmick, 9 trends which are actually built around the word foresight, the 9 letters making up the word foresight. You can see there in the circle starting up at the top, Fourth Industrial Revolution, O for Oriental, R for recessions, E for empowerment, and all the way up to T for access to tell you everything. Now, time doesn't permit us to look at all 9 of these. So I've just chosen 1 or 2, which I think might be relevant for the topic at hand. The Fourth Industrial Revolution. Bearing in mind that the word revolution should not be used lightly. We're not just looking at a once-off event or the invention of one new artifact or device. It's about a whole bunch of things converging in more or less the same time space. So virtual reality, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, big data, 3D printing, all happening in a very short period of time, and arguably revolutionizing society. Not just the world of work, not just the factory place, but revolutionizing transport possibly, revolutionizing politics and even economics. And a great deal has been said and will be said about this. What I want to zoom in on here for the purpose of this exercise is just very simply the kind of, and unfortunately, again, as I say, the animations aren't working here, so I need to go back a bit. This green thing is supposed to glide in gracefully, but thankfully I can still recall what should be written here. Many people are spending a lot of time trying to come up with new job descriptions and job titles. I think this kind of approach is more valuable, looking at the kind of skills that will be required in the years that lie ahead, given this revolution. And if you look at the top 10 skills on the left-hand side, a common denominator there is things such as analytical thinking, complex problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, and other things such as active learning, and things such as leadership, and things such as social interaction between people. So not specific job titles, but rather actual skills. On the right-hand side, I think equally fascinating is it's headed there, talents. What kind of talents will be required in each of the 4 revolutions thus far? The very first revolution, late 1700s, was about physical labor, learning a particular job, if you like, and practicing that for your entire working career. Second revolution was more about business acumen and certainty and rationalization. The third revolution, which is still very much alive and well, things such as deep expertise in a particular area, especially STEM, science, technology, engineering, and maths. And now the interesting part is, in this looming revolution, the talents required are learning agility, learning new things quickly and often, adaptability, empathy, as mentioned by a little bit earlier by Olusiji, empathy, compassion, and then, of course, transdisciplinary thinking, thinking across disciplines and creating brand new knowledge. And the words there in green by Jeff Livingston, I see the movement towards AI and robotics as evolutionary, a large part because there's such a sociological leap. The technology may be ready, but we are not, at least not yet. So in so doing, he and many others are laying down a challenge. Technology is there. Do we have the ability to effectively, efficiently use this technology for the betterment of all of us without compromising people's jobs and livelihoods? The next one, O for Oriental, is really just, I'm taking a bit of a liberty here and using Oriental. Oriental really refers to Asia. I'm using this to talk about the power shift, the economic power shift from the so-called West to the rest. And out of 218 economies on this planet, we find on the map of the world that 5 of the 10 largest are not high-income economies. We see Brazil makes the top 10. So does Indonesia, so does Russia, so does China, and so does India. The other 5 are the more traditional ones. If we look at the little column on the right-hand side, we see the next 10 biggest, countries like Mexico, Turkey, Korea, Thailand, Poland. So we are clearly witnessing, and have been for some time, an economic power shift from the West to the rest. For those of you from South Africa, hopefully you find it interesting that out of 218 countries, South Africa is the 28th largest economy. By the way, Nigeria is even bigger than that. I think it's number 26 or 25. But the point is there are 3 countries in Africa, South Africa, Nigeria, and Egypt, which rank amongst the top 30. Then the next one I want to quickly look at is a more sad one, recessions, and perhaps a rather dramatic statement, although a correct one. And that is, in the last 15 to 16 years, planet Earth has experienced and more or less survived 2 of the worst recessions ever recorded in living memory. The first one was 2008, 2009. Many will remember that one, driven by the financial crisis, which then soon became an economic crisis. And then, of course, more recently, the pandemic-induced major recession. In both cases, across the planet, with 1 or 2 exceptions, we saw recessionary conditions. We've managed to kind of drag ourselves out of those recessions, but just as we thought we had dragged ourselves out, the world, of course, was confronted a couple of years ago by another renewed reality. And that is the first time in many years, inflation rates started accelerating across the planet. And in reaction, interest rates were raised. And that put a dampener on the buoyancy of recoveries. This year, growth, the experts are telling us, will happen. It'll be very mediocre. And even this year and next year's mediocre forecasts might come under pressure, because we have to think about things on the right-hand side, things such as China, which has not recovered as fast as one would have hoped. And by the way, they're also suffering from some very important demographic pressures. We have the ongoing Russia-Ukraine story. We have the Middle East crisis, both of which, amongst others, put pressure on the oil price. We've seen, and we're still seeing, global economic fragmentation. I think it's far too premature to say that globalization has gone away, but the rate of globalization seems to have slowed down. We're still not quite sure when interest rates will start dropping. The good news is most experts feel they will not increase going forward, but it might take a while. It might take a few months, a few quarters before rates start falling. There are more than 60 elections scheduled for this year, including in the USA, of course, UK probably, India, South Africa, and obviously another 56. In the USA and in Western Europe, some experts say that very, very good performers in these elections might be parties that tend towards the right of the spectrum. We have artificial intelligence, ChatGPT and the like, which is making massive progress in a very short period. Across the planet, governments and companies, but especially governments, are highly indebted. And sooner rather than later, they'll have to start reducing that debt. And when they start doing that, it does imply either a drop in government spending or an increase in taxes, both of which are rather unpleasant for consumers and taxpayers. And of course, overarching all of these things, climate change. So the world economy is not in an outstandingly good place right now and for the next few years. On the more positive side, if we, and I think it's important that every now and again we stand back, as it were, and take a longer term look and not just allow ourselves to be influenced by the headlines, the immediate news, last night, this morning, tomorrow, but sometimes let's stand back and have a look at the longer term trend lines. And if we do that, we will find, for instance, that today, compared to any other time in the past, we do have almost universal primary school education. Major progress has been made in achieving adult literacy. Healthcare across the planet is much improved. More and more people, even in remote places, have access to social networks. Mobile money, an African invention, enabling millions and millions of people in Africa who previously did not have access to banks or financial institutions to now have that access. So people are living longer lives than ever before, healthier lives than ever before, better educated than ever before, and better integrated. And just following that, millennials are a prime illustration of the different kind of behavior displayed by empowered individuals. Millennials tend to be more skeptical, more cynical. They don't take much at face value. They get easily bored. They embrace change. They're techno-savvy, looking for a balance between work and leisure. And for them, career is but one ingredient of a lifetime, of a portfolio of experiences. Then, just very quickly, the last of the trends I want to refer to is the graying or the aging of populations, becoming a very big story in many parts of the world, not least of which on the screen, Western Europe, where quite remarkably, about 12, 13 years ago, in Western Europe, the number of people, or number of elderly people, that's the red line, overtook the number of children, which is the blue line. And whilst that has been happening, the population of working age, the green line, has been declining. And this really is understandably a major concern, not only in Europe, the one I'm showing you here, but also in places like Japan, the USA, and China. China, the last couple of years, has recorded a negative population growth rate. Chinese population is getting old very quickly, and that's putting pressure on what we used to call very low labor costs. By contrast, we have Africa as a much younger region. And without going into all the detail here, one can talk about a demographic window of opportunity. Those years when at least 55% of the population is aged 15 to 64. And we see from history, which is reflected in the table on the right-hand side, that when countries experience this window of opportunity, they also enjoyed very good economic growth and improved human development. And we have a look at China, and we see that their window might close down in a couple of years' time. And India, their windows only opened up recently up until around about 2050. And then I've done one or two calculations to discover, and it's not going to show again, I'm afraid, to discover that sub-Saharan Africa's window of opportunity opens up in 2050, roughly 30 years from now. That's for the region as a whole. Obviously, individual countries might be different. But in about 25 years' time, many African countries will also enjoy the potential benefit of a once-in-a-lifetime window of opportunity. But you can only enjoy that benefit if people of working age are appropriately skilled and educated and able to take up jobs. So there's another challenge for leaders across the planet, and certainly leaders in Africa. So just to summarize this part of my little talk, those are the 9 trends. What's important for, I would argue, leaders is to realize, I'm quoting here Kees van der Hayden, that whilst we cannot predict the future, we can recognize what he calls dots on the horizon, those signs of change that will affect every organization. We ask the question, what? What's going on out there? And secondly, once we've established that, we then need to ask ourselves why they are important, these signs of change. What is their significance? And once we've answered that, we then ask ourselves, what actions do we need to take to at least survive, but preferably thrive and prosper from those signs of change? So what's going on out there? So what? And now what? And again, I would argue that visionary leaders are in the game of asking these kind of questions. I want to deviate slightly what I said so far. So I think this is also relevant to the topic. And briefly talk about development, human development, and do so by identifying 5 dimensions of what we could call classical aspirations. The economic aspiration speaks for itself. The scientific aspiration, the quest for truth, the political aspiration, the quest for liberty. But then the remaining 2 are very often either ignored, neglected, or just not thought about. And what we're saying here, or what experts are saying here, is that human beings aspire towards some kind of ethical, moral benchmark of peace and goodness. And they also have an aesthetic aspiration. They want a sense of belonging, of excitement, of meaning. And this kind of approach says that if any one or more of these aspirations are being obstructed, then you cannot talk about true, overall, holistic human development. And any one or more may be obstructed by a state of scarcity, maldistribution, insecurity. And I've circled the last 2 again in the context of our theme this afternoon or this morning. The ethical, moral part of development, the aesthetic part of development, which may be obstructed by a state of normlessness or conflict or fanaticism or fear of loss of identity, of individuality, not having a shared image of the future. And I think, again, as an outsider looking in, I would argue these are some of the responsibilities that leaders ought to look after as a matter of course, but also even more so going forward. So it's time for me to start on a fairly lengthy, I suppose, conclusion. I think I have about 6 minutes left. Let's move on to the next one to save a little bit of time. So from all of this, I propose a number of new ideas, norms, paradigms, new challenges. There's a number of possibilities, but let's start with this. Clearly, for a number of years, we are having a closer look and reappraising the relationship between growth, wealth, and development. And in so doing, one can identify a number of paradoxes. To the left-hand side, you see typical litanies regarding progress. On the right-hand side, we see the potential downside of progress. I won't look at all of them, time doesn't permit, but better machines, that sounds good, but it might result in displaced workers. Many more new products, that sounds good, but they may find it more difficult to make choices. A little bit further down, longer lives, surely one would aspire towards that, but then it does put pressure on supporting the elderly, especially if they're not working. More TV programs might mean more anti-socialization. And there are a few more. Mobile telephones, wonderful, but it does expose us to noxious chatter. Quick information, brilliant, but then you subject to internet hoaxes, scams, and viruses. Cheap, easy messaging, the downside is junk email, insensitive comments. So in a few years' time, people could on average be richer than people today and yesterday, but they might not be happier than today or yesterday. By the way, all of this always reminds me of something, I think it's Mark Twain, who I'm going to paraphrase and update along the following lines. If you are not involved in social media, you are uninformed. If you are involved in social media, you'll probably be misinformed. New business models are emerging, such as we need to more than ever before prepare for the unexpected, so be flexible. Flatter structures means more decentralization and empowerment. Invest in technology is of course, but then make sure you select people who can adapt and use that technology. Teams of partners keep everything alive. It's more about networks, no longer hierarchies. Creating family, a sense of family in businesses. Make people feel special. Provide people with purpose and meaning. Help people to find ways to feel they are building a better world. Dynamic, visionary leadership is crucial. Leaders need to be far-sighted and develop foresight. And again, I've circled these because I think the challenge is loud and clear, implied and explicitly for leaders. Changing world of work, we know all about that. A couple of years ago, the Harvard Business Review published an article on different kinds of work going forward. And this is just one, I suppose, a summary of the whole article. And they had looked at two axes, the democratization of work from low to high, and then technology in work, technological embracement in work from low to high. And they came up with 4 combinations: Uber empowered, work via platforms, project, gigs, technologies, the very latest technologies are used, cloud, on-demand, artificial intelligence, and the like. As opposed to the current state, bottom left, full-time employment, a few contracts here and there, traditional delivery. And then the other two somewhere in between. Just for interest's sake, for the last number of years, whenever I have a chance, I share this with my student groups or even business groups, and I ask them, if you had a choice, where would you like to be as an employee? And this includes groups of youngish people. In Belgium, the classes there, MBA classes, MBA students are probably in their mid-20s. They've grown up in the world of internet and the like. Interestingly, the majority seem to prefer the bottom right-hand one and not so much Uber empowered, which is suggesting that they do want to use the latest technologies, but they also crave a degree of security. So, in conclusion, challenges to leadership. Given what I've said here, leaders of the future will have to prevent the quest for creativity from becoming an all-encompassing obsession. Because that comes from the previous slide. With few people to manage, employees no longer doing boring stuff, leaders will have to provide motivation. A great deal of work will be creative. But as I say, at the same time, never forget the ultimate objective of a business. So you need to balance vision with pragmatism, flexibility with consistency, even stubbornness. Leaders have to be easygoing, but at the same time demanding. Be willing to take risks. That willingness must be balanced against a healthy dose of conservatism. And in addition, leaders will have to be superb deal makers, politicians, and negotiators. So as I finish, I go back to one of my basic roots as a futurist, and I think this is also a challenge to leaders. People often ask me, what does the future look like? My response might be a little bit odd, but I think it is important. My response is often, what do you want it to look like? And I think it's up to leaders going forward to help create that vision of a desired future. And not to say the future is horrible and the future we're going to go from bad to worse, but rather help to co-create a much improved future. And in keeping with my observation that I like to call myself a possibilist, just keep calm, everybody, and remain cautiously optimistic. Thank you. I think I've done that with a minute to spare. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor. That was a very good way to conclude. That was amazing, and thank you so much for your very deep perspective. You called yourself a possibilist, an economist, but you've been able to bring out very important, ingredient, especially if I look at it from African perspective. And I believe that if people are taking note of some of the things you have presented today, it will help our leaders, especially in Africa, to be able to take up that challenge and lead in a different way, in a way that we can begin to see the inequality between the rich and the poor, in a way where we can have people who have superb negotiations, who have unusual but very deep sense of leadership prowess that can manage our resources, that can create opportunities, that can drive development, that can drive growth, and also create wealth for the people. That is amazing. And I listened to you very carefully, and I could pick point that you might not call yourself a leadership expert, but of a truth, you're a leadership expert. Thank you so much, Prof, for that very deep and very insightful and very educative perspective, to this topic. Listeners, if you have questions, please just write them down. We will have a time for question and answer session where Prof will be able to respond to some of the questions that you have in mind. But we want to take, we want to take the two Prof at the same time, and they will come back to a session we have question and answers, and they'll be here to respond to those questions. So please feel free to write them down somewhere, and then at every time, turn it in, and we'll take them one after the other. Thank you so much, Prof, once again. I will proceed to bring in my second speaker, Professor Miha Škerlavaj, to take on this topic on post-heroic leadership, a futures perspective leadership qualities that post-heroic leaders will require. Who is Prof? Professor is a professor of management at the School of Economics and Business University of Ljubljana. Miha has a PhD and a professor of management at the School of Economics and Business in University of Ljubljana. He is an adjunct professor of leadership and organizational behavior at Miha Norwegian Business School. He is a valued teacher, workshop facilitator, and awarded researcher who published in prestigious international research journals, including the Academy of Management Journal, the Harvard Business School Review, the Journal of Organizational Behavior, the Leadership Quarterly, and Human Resource Management, and the book Capitalizing on Creativity, Fostering the Implementation of Creative Ideas at Work. His research was featured in global media such as the New York Times and Forbes. He is involved in several international research collaborations with colleagues from top global business schools. He has extensive practical experience through workshops, trainings, and consulting assignments for clients in Scandinavia, Central and Eastern Europe, and China. I believe he's going to consult in Nigeria very soon. He teaches PhD in EMBA Executive and Master of Science programs in Europe and Asia, and regularly facilitates workshops with practitioners on organizational development and change, leadership, development, organizational culture, and creativity and innovation management related topics. It's the honor of my life to have you, Prof, on this panel, and we look forward to hearing from you in a different perspective to be able to kind of reflect on this very all-important topic, that borders on leadership across the globe, not only in Africa, but in Asia, in Europe, in North America, and everywhere. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome with me to this panel, to this very wonderful panel program, Professor Miha Škerlavaj. It's good to have you, sir, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Olusiji, for these wonderful words of introduction. And at the same time, I would also like to thank Andre for his insightful, or I maybe should rather say foresightful, lecture about where the world is heading. You have definitely pictured the dots on the horizon for us. And that is what leaders need, in my humble experience, regardless of where we sit or stand around this beautiful blue and green planet of ours. I'm gonna kindly ask just to forward my slide deck if you are, yes, here we are. So I'd like to talk to you for this little time we have available about a possibility for a better leadership than the one that we are predominantly used of. And in order to do that, I'd like to refer back to the spectacular work that has been done at Harvard by colleagues, Professors Anthony Mayo and Nitin Noria, and they have asked themselves this grand question of what is it, what makes for a successful leader? What is it that they have in common? And in order to address this holy grail of leadership, the question of what makes for a excellent leader, they have gone at very far length. They have studied thousands of brilliant leaders across the whole of a century. And lo and behold, what they found that they have nothing in common, essentially. These women and men are of very, very different psychological profiles, very different behaviors that they have exhibited. However, what they do have in common in the end, it turns out that is so-called idea of contextual intelligence. So the idea of or the ability to have really a good insight or an excellent in-depth insight of their zeitgeist. And that's exactly where I suppose our knowledge and message from Professor Roux and myself actually fit together. And this is the message about possibilities that we would like to convey to our esteemed audience from around the globe. So one way to look at it, maybe it's a little bit less possibilistic, but it is important to acknowledge, is the idea of a polycrisis. So Adam Tooze coined the term back in the 70s, and World Economic Forum has issued a rather recent study about the perceptions of the global risk landscape among the leaders, among the responsible decision makers out there. And there's really a mouthful of challenges, and I guess it will not come as a surprise that they also overlap, reinforce, and they create a rather demanding environment for leaders to work with. I really like this acronym of foresight, and you will see that it actually matches also the study that has been presented by World Economic Forum, as these challenges fit into 5 major categories: economic, environmental, geopolitical, needless to stress, I guess, societal, and technological. All of these challenges are as much challenges as they are also opportunities. And here are the possibilities for leaders if we are able to also learn about how to lead towards better solutions given undoubtedly demanding business environment. So sometimes these kind of challenges are also called wicked problems, and we have an incredible vast of experiences also how not to handle them. COVID crisis was one of those, one of those challenges, one of those polycrisic situations where a multitude of perspectives needed to sit at the same table. And that was unfortunately very often, at least from the start, not the case. So we tend to search for easy and quick fixes to complex problems. And I suppose this is a little bit of the human nature, that we really are convinced by, overconfidence, and we are convinced by quick fixes, even though they are demanding problems that do require people working together, that we are interdependent in bringing multitudes of expertise and stakeholders around the same table, and that we need the kind of leadership that is able to do that. And for that purpose, there's a sore need for new leadership approaches, newer genre leadership approaches that are better fit for the job. I would like to share with you few cents from an idea called post-heroic leadership, but it's not alone. Referring maybe to the African context, Ubuntu leadership would be most certainly one of those philosophies, one of these worldviews, one of these approaches. How we can exert a better sort of leadership that is fit for the modern times. Let me sort of resort a little bit to mythology and mention a story that we know in our, let's say, European, let's say, mythology, or Greek mythology to be more exact. And it's a story about Heracles. Heracles was a hero that was sent on his penance of difficult labors, and one of them was also to kill the beast called Lernaean Hydra. This Hydra had a nasty habit of, that it was a regenerative kind of threat. So when Heracles would cut off one head, two new would emerge rather than the one that was there immediately, right? So talking about leadership and modern times, the story is that even though we put a lot of hope and expectations of one heroic figure like Heracles, but that did not actually solve the problem. The story is a little bit less known, but it has a continuation, and the continuation is that Heracles actually managed to solve the problem, but he has done it with a little bit of help. So goddess Athena provided this golden sword that was the right tool for the job, and also he had help from Eualeus, who did the cauterizing part, right? So regardless how bloody this metaphor is, I guess you get the point, right? To deal with difficult challenges, we should not rely on heroes, on sole actors, regardless how smart and strong they might be, but we should think of leadership as a shared process. And here comes a story from that probably is quite well known, or many of our participants here on the webinar will recognize the date, will recognize the place. For the rest of us, it's a story of a famous Rugby World Cup match between South Africa and New Zealand, where Nelson Mandela actually used the opportunity to build bridges in troubled times, right? So this is a story that is being told quite often as an act of connective, shared, communal leadership, also in other parts of the globe. And I'm sure we see it in a simpler format as you would see it from South Africa. But the point is that there are stories like that floating around in our popular press, in leadership narratives, and they create certain set of expectations. So the expectations from the leaders that they should be these heroic figures that are able of some sort of transhuman capacities, right? But they also create an immense set of expectations from leaders. At the same time, they also create set of misguided expectations from the side of the followers. So those of us that in a way give credibility to the people that are in the role of leaders. So let me explain a little bit more on what kind of expectations do we have from our leaders. This is again a study from Harvard Business Review by Professor Leinwand and his colleagues, and what they have, what they helped us understand is that we are a little bit demanding from what we hope to get from our leaders, right? So we would like them to be humbled heroes. We would like them to be strategic and also executors. We would like them to be technologically savvy and yet humanist in their approaches. We would like them to be politicians with high integrity. We would like them to be global and local. We would like them to be traditional but innovating. So probably, this is quite a mouthful. It is a lot to expect from a single person, and I am a strong advocate for leadership as a collective process instead. So how does that work? How does it work when we are trying to select leaders for the job? How good are we at this job right now? A long story short, we are not very good. And we are doing a set of misestimations and misplacement that come from either overestimation of leadership competences or their underestimation, or simply we miss the target. So an example of our overestimation is related to the Dunning-Kruger effect, where we actually see that at very low levels of competence, people tend to unrealistically estimate and be overconfident about their own abilities. And it's a catch-22, because the overconfidence is actually quite a convincing phenomenon. So therefore, it's a catch-22 that leads in us placing trust into wrong hands. We are also terrible in estimating or predicting future competence performance, because we get easily fooled by people talking a lot, right? And so therefore they should be able of leading. That's called the babbling effect. Or people that use a lot of hand gestures, so that this overexcitement tends to be also apparently a sign of good leadership. And trust me on word that there is nothing in either talking a lot or using a lot of hand gestures that is associated with good leadership. At the same time, we are also quite often unjust to the introverts. So somehow there's this popular conviction that you have to be extrovert to be a good leader. It is actually not the case. There is strength in introversion. There is strength in ability to actively listen, to be an advocate for others. All of these are underestimated leadership competences that we tend to overlook. And in addition to that, there is quite a strong evidence among leaders and also in some other, let's say, influential roles, that there's a overrepresentation of the dark triad. So a combination of psychological traits of narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellism that make for a horrible combination, but as mentioned, overrepresented among the leadership population. So even though we know, right, that ego is not really the friend, on the contrary, it's an enemy of good leadership, still we see that 1 of 6 CEOs is at least moderately or highly narcissistic. This is actually a study that was done at Stanford and then published in Financial Times to be exact. So it's a mainstream finding that I'm sharing with you. So where are the possibilities? Where are functional, let's say, stories of leadership given this demanding zeitgeist that we are facing? Look no further than around yourself and talk to the people that have stories to share. And that's exactly what we have done. We've been doing that for the last 5 years. Have spoken to more than 20 people from our region that are a little bit less visible, let's say, on LinkedIn maybe, or in popular media, but they have impressive stories to tell. And also, if you talk to their colleagues, they are their team members, they would testify of that. So we've been gathering this kind of leadership stories from all sorts of walks of life, very different kind of settings, from healthcare to software engineering, to gaming, to manufacturing, you name it. It's a quite broad set of organizations and a very diverse set of leaders that actually have something in common. So there's a pattern that I discovered when rereading those transcripts, and that has been quite a strong motivator for me to tell these stories and to write a book, actually, and to do so also in English, so that it's available for a broader audience, because I think that these are the stories that transcend the borders of our beautiful yet tiny country. So all these leadership stories, in a way, have in common that they are stories about team sport, right? So they are stories about certain shared leadership, certain achievements that were result of multitude of people working together rather than one sole act of a heroism. And second part, also, you can sense and understand from all these narratives that these leaders are very much mature, mature group of people that are that have put their lives and work into the service of others and their organization. So shared and servant leadership in a way is what constitutes for post-heroic leadership, and it's also what constitutes for the kind of leadership that I believe and see is fit for the challenges that we are facing and opportunities that we can address in the future. So let me present that a little bit with few of the examples, few of the narratives, so that we have a bit of maybe a better representation of what actually post-heroic leadership in action is. The first dimension is about being servant to the broader goal, to the broader purpose of the organization or society at large. And there are several dimensions. One of them probably that is most striking among all of them is that all these leaders are really, in a way, mature personalities that have found ways how to tackle their ego. And let me exemplify a little bit that, right? So probably situations like that, statements like you can read on these slides would be a counterexample. Rather than that, there's also a very recent story, quite a touching one actually, where Ruth Gottesman has given away $1 billion of dollars to make tuition free at the Bronx. Actually, it's Albert Einstein's Bronx Medical School, and it's her condition was that they will be this will be a school that will educate a profession that our society needs, free of tuition forever. Second part, there was very little self-promotion involved, probably none, as this story really came through the social media rather than through major media. And like quite unusual, she did not ask for the change in name. Her statement was that who could compete with Albert Einstein, right? College, as in the title. So you see that basically it was quite a altruistic set of let's say drivers to do an act like that. And on the right hand side of the slides, you will be able to see what kind of spontaneous reactions that created among the students that just learned that they will start fresh, they will start without a debt, a calling and life. And this will be a motivation or act of pro-sociality that surely will also travel further, and you can expect these people to do a lot of good work in their environments. Like one of my colleagues, one of my interviewees, Damiano Sredkar, he has been sharing in a very humble way how is it to transcend from an excellent medical doctor into a leadership position, and he's been reflecting on this feeling of nakedness and barefootedness, and how he then created an environment for himself where it was not about the people involved, it was about the medicine, it was about the patient, about the user, and therefore this is how they created a shared meaning and an excellent set of results. You can see that also in other environments, that where people are talking about their servant nature of leadership, that the employees are bosses to their bosses. You can also see that one strong driver for post-heroic leadership is also the guidance and the guidance by really understanding the meaning and using meaning as a strong motivational drive. We can see organizations like Dunkin' Devils. They are multiple world champions in acrobatic basketball, and their special strength is the community. So they see themselves in a way as a special form of camaraderie, and one of the tools that they are using is to tease with love. That's how they call it. So they are in a way exposing each other different weaknesses by this rather direct feedback, but we know that it's not about hurting individually, it's about developing it's about developing and growing with a practice like that. We also see more and more conversations about responsibility and accountability. So several of the last interviewees we had were exactly on the topic, right? So one of the interviewees was Jana Krapeš-Trost, who is a co-director in a biotech firm, Via Separations, and she has explained in a way her career path and how this acts of showing responsibility in a way also opened up doors for her to be a post-heroic leadership in that regard. We also have had in Slovenia massive floods in this summer, and Srečko Šestan, the head of our the organization that was organizing the work of 70,000 people that were dealing with this catastrophe, he was also emphasizing responsibility as a major value in an organization like that. So, there are also other stories around the world. If you look a little bit deeper, you will see that all of them in a way do have in common this dimension of sharedness, but also the other dimension that it's about ego. So Katalin Kariko, Nobel Prize awardee in medicine for mRNA COVID vaccines, she is actually addressing this set and a host of opportunities that we would have if we would be able to put aside our ego and serve the community with the knowledge we have. So in a way, these are two topics I think that deserve and grant further attention and discussion. But let me just conclude my short expose with the message that I'd like to share with you. So stories of heroism are in a way very representative of the expectations that we have from our leaders. Stories of narcissism and Machiavellism are unfortunately much too present in the leadership practice as we see. But this is the kind of tune that we should be whistling to ourselves. So the leadership for the present and the future should be about sharedness, and it should be also about servantship. And this, in a way, concludes my discussion and a presentation about post-heroic leadership in practice. Thank you.
Amazing contribution. Thank you so much, Prof, for that very deep perspective, looking at global perspective to this subject of discourse. And I was able to jot down a couple of points from some of the things you talked about. Again, that tells us how deep your perspective, is on the issue. You were able to look at, some wicked problems that in a way affected leadership. And you gave a very good example on COVID-19 and how some of those leaders across the globe were able to manage all of the situation. And that was where you were coming from. And for me, is a very great way to also look at, post-heroic leadership. You were also able to look at it in terms of what the expectations should be in terms of humble hero, strategic executor, technology skilled, but, humanist in nature. You were able to look at politicians, with high integrity, which is one thing that is lacking in most of our leaders, across the globe, except very few examples that we can cite. You also look at, you must be globally oriented, but you must also be local. In other words, you must be able to domesticate that, the global, strength that you have in a way that the people, can feel that. And then you also mentioned it must be traditionally, innovator. You must be able to innovate new things. You must be able to understand by, in a way, map your environment to be able to understand some of the things you can do as a leader, innovate to help, you to be able to lead effectively. And at the same time, you are also able to talk about identifying the right people in leadership, which is also very important. And then, do we have the right people for the job? Or is it because by default, you just have to become a leader or a president, by all right. You talk about overestimation, overestimation in terms of the effect, which is overconfidence and the rest of them. You talk about the, underestimation, the imposter syndrome, which again is a very important one. And then you talk about a very important part of it, which again resonates with me, is the incorrect ratings. When you mention the incorrect ratings, and you talk about the narcissism, the psychopathy, and then the Machiavellism and all of that. So again, I must thank you most kindly for your very deep and broad perspective, to this issue, looking at the global context. You've been able to let us see, some of these very critical parts, and that in a way connects with what Professor Andre also talked about in the morning. So that is one thing I see here. You are able to connect all of those his perspective, and you brought it from a global, point of view. And I believe our readers, people in the audience here are so excited and they are so happy. Thank you so much, Prof, for that very great delivery you just made. So it's time for us to move to questions and answer. If you have questions that you want to ask, we can now see how people in the media can help us to navigate that, whether we are going to have them in the chat box or whether you are going to give opportunity to people in the audience. I don't know whether Monica Manka will be able to let us know how to go about that. If we have any questions in the chat box, whether on all of the social media handle, if you have been able to help us to collate them so that we can direct those questions to both Prof and they can respond to that very quickly. So do we have any questions in the chat box or in the comment section? Okay, no questions for now. All right. So, but most importantly, I would like to engage the two professors on a very important subject of discourse. And if you look at it, I want to bring in a bit of African perspective into some of these issues and see how you can help our audience to be able to understand some of the implications, perhaps the consequences. Very recently, Professor Andre, I believe you are aware that the G20, admitted the African Union, and gave them a permanent seat, sometimes late last year. And again, a lot of people begin to ask questions around whether it's the right thing to do or not the right thing to do. Now, I'm asking you particularly because I also understand the BRICS perspective, where South Africa is also playing a major role in terms of that. But what the G20 have done is in a way to admit the African Union as a continent, looking at the population that we have in Africa. I don't know whether you want to talk briefly in terms of the consequences and the opportunity that it portends for the African Union, looking at that admission into G20. Again, have at the back of your mind, and as a professor of economics, I also know you understand that the G20 is responsible for about 80% of the global GDP, meaning that they have a controlling power in terms of the economic power. What does it portend for the African Union? That admission in terms of the opportunities that it portends for them and the consequences on the other hand. We'd like to do that.
Okay, thank you. Well, I suppose, first of all, one will never know whether that decision was based on politics or economics or a bit of both. But if we talk about the economics of the situation, you quite rightly point out G20 is 80%. By the way, as you also know, South Africa was a member of the G20 to start off with. But what we do know is that the entire continent of Africa, that's both North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, accounts for just less than 5% of the entire world economy. So by admitting Africa, the G20 now accounts for roughly 85% of the world economy. I think one of the reasons behind the decision was probably, as I kind of said a bit earlier, we are witnessing this power shift from what I think I call the West to the rest. And if we have a look at Africa, although small in terms of output and economic output, lots of potential consumers. We know that Africa's population growth rate is by far the fastest in the world. Projections show that by 2040, roughly 26% of the world's population will reside in Africa. That's 1 in every 4 people on this planet which also means 1 in every 4 consumers will be in Africa. It's potentially a gigantic consumer market. Obviously, it's a reality. Many consumers are still fairly poor, but a growing number are entering the ranks of the so-called middle income, becoming meaningful consumers of a range of goods and services, meaningful markets, both for domestic and international suppliers. And I think, as I also pointed out earlier, being such a young population, one could almost say in terms of the demographic window, Africa is the last frontier. So China's currently seeing their demographic window shutting down. India will be next in line until around about 2050. After that, only Africa is left. So maybe it's recognizing that potential demand. We also know that for the last 20 or more years, for instance, The Economist, the well-known magazine, has been saying time and again that although Africa does have many problems, what counts in Africa's favor is, as I've made the point already, that growing middle-income consumer market. I think the potential is being recognized increasingly by countries all over the world. So is it a political decision? Is it an economic decision? Perhaps all of the above. It's perhaps also kind of recognizing something else we know, and that is across the planet, there is growing, I don't want to be too strong about it, but growing dissatisfaction, growing criticism about the impotence or the inability of bodies such as the World Bank and the IMF and other similar bodies to really make a difference. And of course, as you know, in Africa, the World Bank is for many people almost a swear word, given their involvement in Africa in the past. So I think it's kind of also perhaps recognizing that and trying to perhaps make up for that. But how that fits up with leadership, if I may ask a question to my colleague, to Miha, if that's all right. And remember, I'm not an expert in leadership, but I think very often when we think about leaders, I think invariably we think about political leaders and big corporate leaders. Am I right in saying, and I think I'm getting it from your story, that community leaders are just as important? In fact, even within a family, leadership is important. So it's cross-cutting all levels of society. And I think sometimes we're very unfair, and I think you made the point as well, that we expect so-called leaders, these hallowed leaders elected to power or CEOs, we expect them to sort out all our problems and solve everything. And we very often fail to take ownership as ordinary individuals or small communities or small businesses, NGOs as we call them. We often fail to take ownership of our own responsibility with regard to understanding the challenges and trying to deal with them. But maybe I'm putting words in your mouth.
Oh, no. You are putting a lot of, you offered a lot of food for thought, both of you, also from where I stand and the kind of dilemmas I'm dealing with also in my daily work with leaders. Most of them are, in essence, business leaders, but they are not necessarily those peaks of the mountain that we see in press and in media and so on. They are also leaders that are there on a shop floor on a day-to-day basis, and they are the ones that have profound impact on the culture in organization, on the quality of life, on the innovation that is being created. There's a whole set and mass of these people, invisible people that are doing a remarkable job. They can be in business organizations, they can be in our societies, they can be in non-for-profits. A lot of them are creating a lot of very solid value for all of us, and I think they should deserve a little bit more of the spotlight that they are getting. That's exactly what was the driving force for me also to be part and to persist and actually also thrive in creating this podcast and radio broadcast that I mentioned. Right, so that's one. So who should we focus our spotlights on, and by that, what kind of leadership behaviors and patterns should we also share with all the rest that are not in leadership roles right now. So what kind of expectations should we trigger among them? We have this inbuilt convictions that are so off the point and so not connected to reality or research that we know. So one of them is, for instance, that in crisis we need autocratic leaders. I've heard that several times, also on the day when the COVID crisis has been declared, and I said, no, that's not what we know about leadership in crisis and in complex situations. And lo and behold, in a year time, a study came out among the governors among the US states, and they have shown that the countries with males in power actually had excessive mortality rates compared to our female leaders. So I know it's not necessarily one-on-one, right, whether one are post-heroic or not, but there are some gender-based leadership behaviors, and that's a pretty good approximation of how costly or autocratic leadership can be. So I didn't go into that depth to share meta-analytical evidence, but again, you see the democratic types of leadership are actually creating also financial results. Autocratic leadership is not associated with performance. So we have a lot of possibilities there, to use your vocabulary, a lot of possibilities in how we educate for good leadership, regardless of the domain of practice.
Excellent. I want to come to Professor Roux on another question that is very important that my audience will benefit from. But before then, I think we have one question from the audience here. He said, servant leaders are often introverted and do well in smaller organizations in office. In an organization that is scaling and has a hybrid work setup across multiple locations, how best do leaders behave? I don't know whether you want to take that, Miha, whether Prof want to take that, or you want to say
Sure. I can try to share my reflection on this. I'm familiar with several of the meta-analysis about servant leadership, and I actually am not so deeply convinced that they are that there's a one-on-one relationship with introversion or the size of their organizations. It is more likely that this observation is a result of the fact that they are less visible, right? So that we tend to see the leaders that are more self-promoting and narcissistic, and that's creating also a little or quite heavily blurred perception of what effective leadership is. That would be my humble reflection on what I know about research about servant leadership, and also what I observe in practice when working with leaders of all sorts.
Excellent. Any following thought, Professor Roux? Want to say a few words on that, or I should just go to another question?
I think that's beyond my knowledge, but I would like to ask one question, if I may, and that is, that's probably an old question. Are leaders born, or can leaders be trained? Can people be trained to be a leader?
Oh, yeah, that's a big one, an old one. So leaders are, let me go a step back. Actually, let me rewind a little bit. The work on effective leadership has started in a rather simplistic manner. So they were trying to explain how should the best leader look like, and who should the best leaders be, right? And it happened so that it was a male of 55 years old, rather tall and white in complexion, right? So imagine how little that has to do actually with leadership. We progressed since, fortunately, right? And we have shifted very much so away from who leaders are rather than how do they behave. And since we know, right, that it's much more about the leadership behavior, then we also know that this is something that can be trained. and that can be educated, and we can learn from, especially in the work environment, we can learn through socialization. So I think that this, going back to my initial slide about in the book In Their Time, right? It tells you that, of course, there is something that these people have in common. So they have certain psychological traits that make them a little bit more sensitive to the environment around them. So they are better able to see the dots, right, on the horizon. This is super important, especially for the strategic leadership positions. For more operational or tactical levels, I would say that these people skills of empathy and the relational work, all these things are quite important, can be trained, but are also inborn a little bit. So we know that, for instance, there's a small part of population that is physically incapable of empathizing, but these are pathologies, right? And yet we have 4 times to 6 times more of them actually in the leadership positions than they are in the general population. So long answer to a very complex short question. The answer is both, but we can influence the developmental part, and therefore I think it is quite crucial that we do dedicate time and energy to the topic of leadership development and selection before that.
Excellent, very good one. I want Professor Andre to say a few words on this particular question before I go into the chat box again. And it's important that I just want to hear your perspective about, in terms of what role can African leaders play in addressing global issues such as climate change, trade imbalances, and economic inequality within the G20 framework.
Well, I mean, obviously I'm biased. Being from Africa, I would like to think they can play a major role. The question is, sadly, and I'm being very naughty now, will they be allowed to play that role? Kind of brings us back to your earlier question, the admission of African Union into the G20. Maybe that's an early kind of recognition that African leaders can indeed play a role. I suppose another related question regarding Africa is, and again, I'm being very naughty, but I wonder to what extent fragile egos play a role in African leaders. I'm talking mainly about government or country leaders. Egos tend to be a little bit fragile. There's a bit of jealousy, problems such as giantism, where a handful of countries, yours for instance, mine, Egypt, are very big relative to their neighbors. And there's always this sort of degree of fear about Big Brother might impose themselves on neighboring countries. So I think it's very important, I believe, that within Africa, we kind of get our act together and are able to offer a truly harmonious, combined kind of view on world affairs and not come across as being fragmented amongst ourselves. It's part of another story which I always talk about, well, not always, but often bugs me. And that is that when people outside Africa, or many people outside Africa, when they hear the word Africa, they automatically think about one big country, one big blob, one big nation, which is identical in all respects. And they often forget it's 55, 56 different countries, different legacies, different histories, different politics, different religions, different everything. So I think we need to, as I say, retain that individuality, but at the same time, when it comes to global affairs, we need to speak with one tongue, as it were. And that's not going to be easy. I don't think so. It raised another question, and I'll stop talking, and kind of, it's about Africa at the moment, or historically for the last 50 or 60 years, where we often find that military leaders, by force, or sometimes through democracy, generally by force, have taken over leadership of countries. And one wonders whether that has always stood us in good stead. I mean, there are many examples. You know what I'm talking about. Ghana, your country at one stage, many countries in Africa have been subject to military takeovers. And then I suppose that's a kind of autocratic leadership. So I think to answer your question, I'm biased. I think we can play a major role. But it's going to take some persuading for leaders across the planet to recognize that. And I think the persuasion has to come from us, has to come from within. We need to convince them that we're not a fragmented ragtag of countries, but we are indeed, we can present a cohesive whole in terms of taking views on these big, burning international issues.
Thank you so much, Professor Andre. And I'd like to share also your perspective, Professor Miha, on this particular question before I take the last one from the audience. I'm still talking about the admission of African Union into G20. But here is the question I want to bring to your attention for you to help us share your perspective on it. Is that how might the admission of the African Union into that G20 affect the existing power blocks? There are different power blocks within G20. How would the admission, in a way, affect it, disrupt it? The power dynamics and alliances within the group. And what kind of leadership quality should African leaders bring to the table to be able to align or disrupt that power dynamics that play within G20? Your perspective is highly needed here, sir.
So I'll put a large exclamation point next to everything I'm about to say, that I'm much more curious that I'm knowledgeable about Africa. I think that this is what we're doing today is a wonderful opportunity for us to learn from each other, and that's exactly what we need also in future. When we are closer to each other, we tend to see nuances, we tend to see trees and leaves and branches, and when we are from a distance, we tend to see the wood, right? This is a very classical, let's say, social categorization phenomena that has been with us for quite some time. It's going to stay. So I think from looking from very far and with all these limitations that I have, I think that leaders in general and in Africa in particular also need structural environment to be able to exert a sound leadership, right? So you need a business environment that enables you to work in accordance to what you believe and what you know is helpful. So it will have to, in a way, work together, that not only leadership behaviors, but also structural conditions and their own business environments and institutional environment will be further developed. I think that's the part. Leaders need to have also an environment in which they can, they can contribute. So that's one very general observation, but quite an important one. The second part, I'm going to comment on military leadership. As a matter of fact, we tend to see military as a highly mechanicistic organization, right? In essence, there has been quite a lot of work in terms of how they organize their own leadership in a military environment. So there's the whole set of studies about and practice about teams of teams, right? So when, for instance, on the battlefield, teams need to make certain decisions, and where there is no time to communicate with somebody in the higher power, empowerment and this shared team leadership has also been practiced in this kind of environment, right? So I'm saying that it's not necessarily that the healthy or productive types of leadership is restricted to some industries and prohibited in others. We see good leaders in many different environments. I really hate to stereotype, because we tend to do a lot of injustice to a lot of good leaders out there.
Thank you very much. And I will still pose this question to you from the audience. And I think it's just very direct to you. It said, I think that the situation in Slovenia is such that most traditional companies do not recognize the competencies of post-Eric managers. What do you think about it?
I don't have really a study that would, go across 2 million people and several of tens of thousands organizations to be a judge of whether it's predominant or not. It's most certainly more visible, these traditional approaches, than the modern ones, but the the stories that I've been sharing now together with my colleague, the journalist Tanja Hlača-Ferjančić, over the last 5 years are also stories about possibilities in this environment that our participant has also been critical about, and with all the rights to be critical about. But there are possibilities and there are stories that are encouraging after all.
Excellent, excellent. And I think I will ask Professor Andre this last question from the audience here. And it's talking about there's too much promotion of managers based on old merit in terms of loyalty to the company, the VIP system, godfatherism, and all of that. So how do you change all of this if there is need to be changed? How do you change all of this in terms of this whole traditional structured way of doing things? I see godfatherism here, but I'm also looking at it maybe from an angle of succession and mentorship, beyond godfatherism. So what are your thoughts, sir?
Yeah, so this is I understand follow-up, right, question to the previous one, as it comes from the same person. I think we are talking about two different things. So loyalty, I don't think is a bad word per se. So it really depends on the type of culture and the kind of organization you are nurturing. So there are a lot of organizations that have benefited quite a lot due to this family type of culture, right? So people were willing to go through good and bad times. They were willing to, go beyond the job description, invest themselves emotionally, physically, and intellectually into development of an organization. And I think this should be awarded. This is something that we should appreciate, right? At the same time, it should not be. It should be done in a way that is transparent and also fair. So the words about VIP and godfatherism are, in my humble understanding, a little bit different than loyalty is, right? So it means that there's a intransparent set of criteria in accordance to which certain people are promoted, right? So that you have nepotism and things like that. Most certainly, this creates sense of psychological unsafety. It creates sense of lack of fairness, and can lead to a host of unproductive work behavior. So we should keep these two phenomena apart, and that's one message. And the other one is that it really depends on the kind of organization culture that we are referring to. I hope this makes a little sense and and answers the question that our participant had.
Thank you so much, Miha, for that. It makes a lot of sense. So I want Professor Andre to comment on that as well.
Well, I mean, I think Miha said it so well. First of all, I'm not sure whether one can generalize. And secondly, from the nature, the way in which the question is asked, I think the questioner is kind of criticizing the system and then asking how to change this. If it is a system worth criticizing, then my counter question would be, why do employees, why do others condone it? And that's often the case, I think, at a political level as well. We often criticize leaders, political leaders, and yet we kind of condone their behavior as well. We tolerate it. And by not protesting against such behavior, if it is bad behavior, by not protesting, we are actually giving them the go-ahead. So once again, I'd like to turn it around and say that leadership, from my limited understanding, is not just about the visible public figures, the charismatic figures, the ones who hit the headlines. It's about, within each person, a responsibility to take ownership of many things. I think we far too easily blame governments for everything and expect governments to solve all our problems. As I say, we need to own our own responsibility and accountability.
Yes,
Excellent.
here to that. I also think that leadership is also about followership. So, those that follow will give credibility to leaders. If you have to go to elections, go there, choose the best you can or the least worst you can, and don't complain of the after in retrospective. The same for leadership in organizations. If you have a chance to be a leader, be a leader. If you don't have it, then support those that you think will do a good job.
Excellent. All right. Thank you so much, both of you. It's been quite wonderful. And honestly speaking, I believe the audience have learned a lot. My humble self have learned a lot, and I believe we've exchanged knowledge, in this room. So let me just get your concluding remarks, just in one minute, your concluding remarks, and I'll start with Miha from the other end, and then Professor Andy will wrap up. Concluding remarks, your final thoughts on this topic.
First of all, thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity. It has been an absolute pleasure and an honor to share a little bit of insights from our part of the world. And I've learned quite really immensely a lot from Professor Roux and from you, Olusiji. And let's say that this is just a good start into a journey of mutual understanding and co-creation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That is appreciated. Professor Andre.
Yes, I'd like to echo those sentiments. Thank you to you as well for your hosting and your meaningful comments in between. Also, if I may, we often forget people who arrange these things behind the scenes. And I'll probably miss a few names, but people like Christelle, Lizelle, Manka, and a few others whose name I perhaps missed. Thank you so much to you for all the arrangements. That's the difficult part. And to everyone who logged in or will log in and will be viewing this, hope you enjoy it, and hopefully one day we'll meet. I'd also like to thank Miha again for joining us on behalf of the Stellenbosch Business School. Thank you so much, and goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Please let me give this concluding thoughts, and then please permit my biases from the perspective of Africa. As we look forward or look towards the future of African leadership, it is important to recognize the progress that has been made, but also acknowledge the work that still lies ahead. The concept of post-heroic leadership calls upon leaders to move away from the traditional model of the single hero at the helm towards a more collaborative and inclusive approach to governance. In Africa, we have seen some encouraging signs of this shift towards more inclusive leadership. There are leaders who are listening to the voices of their people, working to build consensus and fostering a culture of transparency and accountability. These are all positive developments that bode well for the future of the continent. However, there is still much work to be done. African leaders must prioritize the needs of their people, invest in education and healthcare, and work to eradicate corruption and inequality. They must also empower the next generation of leaders, particularly women and young people, who will be instrumental in shaping the future of Africa. And in conclusion, the prospects for Africans and their leadership are bright, but it will require continued dedication, hard work, and a commitment to the principles of democracy and good governance. I have seen firsthand the incredible potential in the African continent, and I'm confident that with the right leadership, Africa will continue to rise and thrive in the years to come. I must thank you most kindly, my wonderful panelists, Professor Miha, Professor Andre, for your incredible contributions and then for enlightening the audience and every one of us here. Thank you so much for the people working behind the scene. Thanks to Christelle, thanks to Lizelle, thanks to Manka, and every other person that I may not be able to mention their names. We really appreciate you. And to the audience, thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, and thank you so much. We'll continue this conversation some other time. And until then, I leave you in the good hands of the Almighty and say stay blessed and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you so much, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.